What if I told you some of history's greatest empires rose and fell because of whispered words from shadowy figures who claimed to see the future? For centuries, ancient oracles held power that kings and conquerors couldn't ignore. Voices from the dark, speaking in riddles, bending the course of wars, love affairs, and even the fate of civilizations. These weren't just fortune-tellers, they were the hidden architects of destiny, weaving prophecies that terrified rulers, sparked rebellions, and sometimes came true in ways no one could have predicted. Think about it. A single cryptic message from the Oracle of Delphi could send armies marching or halt them in their tracks. A whispered warning from the Sibyl of Cumae might decide who lived, who died, and who wore a crown. These stories aren't just relics of superstition, they're gripping dramas of power, fear, and the human obsession with peering beyond the veil of time. And here's the thing, most of us only know the surface-level myths. But what about the secrets buried in crumbling temples, the prophecies that were erased from history, or the shocking truths behind the oracle's most famous predictions? That's where this journey begins. Today, we're uncovering 25 hidden stories of ancient oracles, tales of deception, divine madness, and moments when the line between myth and reality blurs. You'll hear about the priestess who predicted her own death with eerie precision, the long-lost prophecy that nearly toppled Rome, and the chilling reason some oracles spoke in fumes that smelled like rotting flesh. This isn't just history, it's a labyrinth of mysteries waiting to pull you in. So ready to step into the shadows and hear what the ancients never wanted fully revealed. The truth is stranger than any legend. Long before Rome became an empire, when its legions were still carving their dominion across the Mediterranean, a lone priestess in Delphi sat trembling in the sacred inner chamber, her voice choked with the fumes of prophecy. The Pythia, the woman chosen to channel Apollo's will, had just delivered a warning so shocking that even the seasoned temple scribes hesitated to record it. "Beware the eagle that devours its own wings," she gasped, her eyes rolling back as the sacred vapors swirled around her. "When the wolf howls in the Senate, the marble shall bleed." The Roman envoys who'd traveled weeks to seek Delphi's counsel scoffed. Rome was unstoppable, a republic forged in iron and law. What could this raving woman know? But the Pythia's words weren't just poetic doom, they were a razor-sharp diagnosis of Rome's fatal flaw. The eagle was the empire itself, and the wings its legions stretched too thin across rebellious frontiers. The wolf in the Senate, a direct jab at the backstabbing greed of Rome's elite, whose corruption would one day rot the republic from within, and the bleeding marble. A chilling foreshadowing of the assassination of Julius Caesar on the Senate floor decades later, his blood pooling between the very stones meant to symbolize order. Here's the twist, the prophecy wasn't lost to history. Fragments survived in temple archives and scandalized Roman diaries, buried under layers of imperial propaganda. Because Rome did fall, not in a day, but in the slow unraveling the Pythia had warned of. Civil wars, economic collapse, barbarian invasions, all of it foretold in those few hissed words. But by the time the Senate admitted the oracle might have been right, the fissures were too deep to repair. The most terrifying part, the Pythia herself reportedly died within days of delivering the prophecy, her body found with a single tear dried on her cheek, as if she'd glimpsed the full horror of what she'd seen. Deep in the rugged mountains of northwestern Greece, where mist clings to the valleys like a ghostly shroud, stood one of the ancient world's most enigmatic oracles, Dodona. Unlike the grandeur of Delphi, this sacred site held its power in the trembling leaves of a single ancient oak tree. The priests of Zeus believed the god himself spoke through the rustling branches, his messages decoded by barefoot priestesses who pressed their ears to the whispering wind. It was a place of raw, unfiltered prophecy, no riddles, no smoky chambers, just the raw voice of nature delivering divine will. And then there was King Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, a man whose ambition was matched only by his superstition. On the eve of a crucial campaign against the Illyrians, a rival tribe threatening his northern borders, Philip sent envoys to Dodona with a single burning question: should he strike now or wait? For days, his messengers stood beneath the sacred oak, straining to hear meaning in the chaotic dance of leaves. Then, without warning, the wind stilled, and the tree seemed to sigh a single, shuddering phrase: "The wolf hunts best in winter." Philip understood. He delayed his attack, biding his time as the seasons turned. When snow finally choked the mountain passes, trapping the Illyrians in their strongholds, his army struck with brutal precision. The frozen terrain, which should have been a death sentence for any invader, became his greatest ally. His enemies, caught unprepared, fell like wheat before the scythe. The Dodona oracle's warning wasn't just a prediction. It was tactical genius disguised as divine guidance. But here's what the history scrolls rarely mention: that same oak tree had a darker secret. Years later, when Alexander sought its counsel before his march into Persia, the leaves reportedly hissed a warning so dire, his court scribes burned the record of it. Some whispered the tree foresaw his early death, others claimed it cursed his bloodline. Whatever the truth, Alexander never returned to Dodona, and by the time Rome swallowed Greece centuries later, the sacred oak stood leafless and dead, as if the gods had reclaimed their voice. Today, all that remains are a few weathered stones and the lingering question: were those whispers just the wind, or something far older and far more terrifying pretending to be? The most dangerous prophecies aren't the ones spoken, they're the ones that survive against all odds. Take the Sibyl of Cumae, an oracle so feared that even Rome's hardiest generals trembled at her name. Unlike the cryptic Pythia of Delphi, the Sibyl didn't deal in riddles. Her prophecies were stark, unflinching, and written in plain Latin, which made them all the more terrifying. Legend says she arrived one day at the gates of Rome with 9 leather-bound books, each filled with visions of the city's doom. Burn them, she warned, or keep them. But know this: the price of ignorance will be paid in rivers of blood. The Senate laughed. King Tarquin the Proud, Rome's last monarch, scoffed at her audacity, until she burned 3 books right before his eyes and doubled the price for the remaining 6. When he refused again, she burned 3 more. Something in her hollow-eyed stare finally cracked his arrogance. He paid her weight in gold for the last 3 volumes, and what those books contained would haunt Rome for centuries. One prophecy warned of a great fire that would devour the city, a prediction fulfilled when Nero allegedly fiddled among the flames. Another spoke of foreign gods rising from the ashes, foreshadowing Christianity's rise after the empire's collapse. But the third book held the most chilling secret: instructions for Rome's survival. Hidden among doom-laden verses was a single line: "When the wolf's den stands empty, seek the phoenix in the east," a coded directive that later emperors interpreted as a mandate to move the capital to Constantinople. Here's what the history books won't tell you: those lost 6 books, fragments survived in the basements of Vatican archivists and medieval forgers' workshops. Some claim they predicted everything from the fall of the Western Empire to the rise of fascism millennia later. But the real mystery isn't what the Sibyl saw, it's why she chose to sell only fragments of the truth. Was she sparing Rome from despair, or did she know some futures are better left unread? Alexander the Great didn't just conquer empires, he rewrote the rules of destiny itself. And nowhere was that more clear than when he marched his army across the blistering sands of the Egyptian desert, not to claim a city or crush a rebellion, but to seek the approval of a god. The Oracle of Ammon at Siwa Oasis wasn't just another shrine. It was a place so hallowed that even pharaohs bowed before its mysteries. And Alexander, the young king who'd already toppled Persia's might, needed something more than victory. He needed divinity. The journey alone should have killed him. For weeks his army struggled through the endless dunes, their water skins running dry, their horses collapsing under the sun. Legend says a sudden sandstorm buried the landmarks, leaving them lost until two black ravens appeared, guiding them to the oasis like winged heralds of Ammon himself. When Alexander finally stood before the oracle, the question he asked wasn't recorded, but the answer echoed through history. You are the son of Zeus Ammon. Not just a king, not merely a conqueror, a god walking among mortals, but here's what the poets don't sing about. This was no spontaneous divine revelation. Alexander had been carefully crafting his myth for years, seeding rumors of his divine birth, paying Greek priests to whisper of his connection to Zeus. Siwa was the final piece of the puzzle. Egypt, freshly wrested from Persian control, had a long tradition of pharaohs being living gods. What better way to secure his rule than to have Ammon's own priests anoint him? The oracle's declaration wasn't just spiritual, it was a masterstroke of political theater, and the real kicker, the oracle may have been playing its own game. Ancient sources hint that the high priest of Siwa, wary of Alexander's army camped outside his temple, knew exactly what the young king wanted to hear. By calling him a god, he wasn't just flattering Alexander, he was ensuring the oasis's survival. After all, who would dare plunder a place that crowned them divine? The fallout was immediate. Coins minted after Siwa showed Alexander with the ram's horns of Ammon, a visual claim to godhood. His generals, already in awe of his victories, now treated him with near religious reverence. But the prophecy had a darker edge. Some claim the oracle also warned Alexander that his father's true identity would bring him no joy, a cryptic hint that his godlike status might isolate him from the mortal world he sought to rule. Years later, as he lay dying in Babylon at just 32, his final whispered words were said to be a question: who shall inherit my empire? Perhaps even a god couldn't outrun fate. Few oracles demanded as steep a price for their wisdom as the cavern of Trophonius. Hidden beneath the ruins of Lebedea in Greece, this wasn't just a place of prophecy, it was a descent into nightmare. Those brave or foolish enough to seek answers had to crawl through a narrow, pitch-black tunnel, their bodies squeezed between jagged rocks as the earth itself seemed to breathe around them. At the end, a gaping void where the spirit of Trophonius, a demigod said to have been swallowed by the earth, whispered truths that shattered minds as often as they enlightened them. And then there was Thegenes, a hardened Spartan general who marched into that hole laughing at superstition and crawled out a broken man. He'd come seeking guidance before a crucial campaign against Thebes, expecting the usual cryptic riddles of oracles. What he got was worse. As he later confessed to his scribe-in fragments burned upon his death, the darkness didn't just speak to him, it showed him visions of his own men turning on each other, their spears slick with Spartan blood. The agonized face of his son, trampled beneath war horses in a battle that hadn't yet happened. And worst of all, his own reflection in a pool of black water aged decades in an instant, his eyes hollow, his armor rusted with neglect. The effect was immediate. Thegenes called off the invasion, earning ridicule from his peers. But within months, Thebes crushed a Spartan force in the exact valley his vision had foretold. The son he'd seen dying, sent away to safety on his orders only to perish years later in eerily similar circumstances. The general himself reportedly slept with a lamp burning until his death, terrified of seeing that aged face in the shadows again. What makes Trophonius's oracle uniquely horrifying isn't just the accuracy of its visions. It's the way they clung to their victims like a curse. Ancient accounts describe seekers emerging with hair turned white overnight or unable to laugh for years afterward. Some whispered the cave didn't just show the future, it reshaped it, planting nightmares so vivid they willed themselves into being. Even the priests warned visitors, once you heard Trophonius's voice, you could never unhear it. Modern archaeologists still debate what really happened in that cave. Natural gas leaks, hallucinogens in the ritual honey cakes consumed before descending. Or something far older slithering in the bedrock that enjoyed playing with mortal sanity. One thing certain, of all Greece's oracles, this was the only one where the price of truth wasn't gold or sacrifice, but a piece of your soul. The Persian Empire's mighty fleet had never known defeat until the oracle of Didyma whispered a warning that no one heeded. Nestled along the windswept coast of western Anatolia, this sacred site wasn't just another temple. It was the beating heart of Apollo's prophetic power in the east, rivaling even Delphi in its influence. And when King Darius the Great sent his envoys to consult its priests before launching an invasion of Greece, the message they carried back should have changed history. The sea will burn with the tears of the vanquished. Darius dismissed it as poetic nonsense. His navy, after all, was the terror of the Mediterranean, hundreds of warships crewed by battle-hardened Phoenicians and Egyptians. What could a handful of Greek city-states do against such might? But the oracle wasn't speaking in metaphors. Recent excavations at Didyma's ruins have uncovered something startling. Clay tablets buried beneath the temple precinct, recording precise details of the prophecy. One fragment, carbon dated to the year 490 before the Common Era, warns explicitly of fire upon the waves and wooden walls that weep. The disaster unfolded exactly as foretold. At the Battle of Salamis in 480, the Persian fleet, crowded into a narrow strait, found itself outmaneuvered by the smaller, quicker Greek triremes. Then came the horror. The Greeks had coated their ships with flammable resin, launching burning arrows into the tightly packed Persian ranks. Within hours, the sea was a churning inferno, the screams of drowning men mingling with the crackle of flaming hulls. The wooden walls of Persia's pride wept pitch as they sank, just as the oracle had described. But here's what the archaeological record reveals that even ancient historians missed. Digs near the temple's sacred spring uncovered votive offerings, Persian in style, left abruptly in the years after Salamis. Jewelry, weapons, even a general's seal ring, all buried in haste. It's as if surviving officers, desperate to appease the god they'd ignored, returned to Didyma in secret. The most chilling find, a broken amphora containing a scrap of papyrus with a single line, "We should have listened." The lesson wasn't lost on later conquerors. Alexander the Great, passing through Didyma after his own naval victories, reportedly spent 3 nights in the temple's inner sanctum. No record exists of what he asked or what answers he received, but when he emerged, he ordered the oracle's temple rebuilt in marble, as if paying a debt to the divine. Perhaps he understood what Darius did not. Some warnings aren't just predictions. They're lifelines thrown too late. Beneath the ruins of what was once the bustling port city of Colophon, hidden in a grove of ancient cypress trees, lay one of the ancient world's best-kept secrets, the Oracle of Claros. While Delphi's Pythia stole the spotlight, Claros operated in the shadows, its priests perfecting a far more precise and far more dangerous art of prophecy. The key, a subterranean chamber laced with natural fissures that leaked ethylene gas, a potent intoxicant that could send the oracle into a frenzy of divine madness. Unlike the theatrical performances of other shrines, Claros' prophecies were delivered in chilling monotone, the oracle's voice stripped of emotion, as if channeling something far colder than human imagination. And then there was the scandal of Senator Lucius Vitellius. In the year 63, at the height of Nero's reign, Vitellius arrived at Claros under the cover of night, his face hidden by a hood. Rome's elite weren't supposed to consult foreign oracles. It undermined the state-sanctioned augurs. But Vitellius was desperate. His political faction was crumbling, his allies vanishing into Nero's dungeons. What happened next was recorded in the diary of a temple slave, later found buried in the foundations. The oracle, a gaunt man named Eumenes, inhaled the sacred vapors, then spoke 7 words that made Vitellius recoil. The purple waits, but the fire hungers. Vitellius fled back to Rome, convinced the prophecy hinted at Nero's downfall and his own chance at the throne. But the oracle's words were a double-edged sword. 4 years later, when Vitellius finally seized power during the chaos of the Year of the 4 Emperors, His reign lasted barely 8 months before the legions of Vespasian burned Rome's gates. The fire wasn't Nero's, it was his own. Archaeologists rediscovered Claro's hidden mechanisms in the 1980s, finding traces of ethylene in the temple's underground tunnels. But the most unsettling discovery, dozens of small lead scrolls, each inscribed with the names of Roman officials, likely clients who'd paid for clandestine prophecies. One bore Vitellius' full name and title, along with a single, hastily scrawled addendum. He did not understand. The priests of Claros hadn't just predicted the future, they'd weaponized it. Their prophecies were surgically crafted to exploit their clients' fears, ensuring they'd walk away with exactly the interpretation that served the temple's interests. Power, after all, wasn't just in seeing the future. It was in shaping how others reacted to it, and in that, Claros may have been the most brutally accurate oracle of them all. The art of divination among the Etruscans wasn't for the faint of stomach. While Greek oracles gazed into smoke and Egyptian priests interpreted dreams, the haruspices, Etruria's elite seers, found their truths in the steaming entrails of sacrificed animals. Livers, lungs, and even the curvature of a sheep's intestines became maps of fate, read with the precision of surgeons. And in the year 44 before the Common Era, one such haruspix named Spurina made a discovery so horrifying it should have rewritten history. The scene was a public sacrifice in Rome just weeks before the Ides of March. Caesar, newly declared dictator for life, watched as the ritual bull's belly was slit open, standard practice before major political decisions. But when Spurina reached into the carcass, his hands emerged trembling. The liver was deformed, its lobes withered, and where there should have been a clear gallbladder, only a pulsing mass of blackened tissue remained. The Etruscan texts called this the omen of the betrayed ruler, a sign that death would come from those closest to power. Spurina didn't hesitate. Beware the next 30 days, he warned Caesar. They reek of blood. What happened next wasn't just negligence, it was a calculated silencing. Caesar scoffed, dismissing the prophecy as superstitious nonsense. His inner circle, including Brutus and Cassius, laughed along a little too loudly, but Spurina wasn't done. Records from the Temple of Apollo, discovered in the ruins of Pompeii, reveal he performed 2 more sacrifices that same week, each time finding the same grotesque deformities. The final report, scribbled on a wax tablet later found near the Tiber, contained one chilling addition: the knife waits among friends. Here's where history gets slippery. Most accounts claim Caesar ignored the warnings, but a 1st-century letter from a Roman physician to his Greek colleague tells a different story. According to this fragile papyrus preserved in the dry sands of Egypt, Caesar privately summoned Spurina after the 3rd omen. The dictator allegedly offered him a fortune to keep silent, then doubled the palace guard. If true, it means Caesar knew. He just couldn't or wouldn't believe the betrayers included Brutus, the man he'd pardoned and treated like a son. The aftermath was even more telling. After the assassination, Spurina vanished from Roman records. No triumphant mentions of his accurate prophecy, no rewards from the conspirators for his warning. Just silence. Some scholars argue the haruspix was quietly eliminated by Brutus' faction, lest his continued presence remind people the gods had openly condemned their coup. Others whisper that Spurina, realizing too late his prophecy had been weaponized, fled Rome in disgrace. Modern science sheds eerie light on the incident. Veterinary pathologists examining ancient Etruscan divination manuals note that the liver abnormalities Spurina described, blackened tissue, missing lobes, are classic signs of advanced cirrhosis or liver fluke infections. In other words, the bull might have been sick for months, its organs slowly rotting from within. Was it coincidence that the perfect sacrificial animal, chosen by Caesar's own priests, just happened to bear the markings of betrayal? Or did someone ensure the gods would send a very specific message? The Etruscans believed the future wasn't just predicted in entrails, it was written there. And in Caesar's case, it was written in blood. At the edge of modern-day Turkey, where steaming white terraces cascade like petrified waterfalls, lies one of antiquity's most surreal sacred sites, the plutonium of Hierapolis. Pilgrims from across the ancient world braved earthquakes and bandits to reach this gaping cavern, where toxic gases seeped from the earth like the breath of Hades himself. The priests of Apollo called it the gateway to the underworld, but what happened here wasn't just ceremony, it was a calculated dance with death. Witnesses describe how seekers would line up at dawn, clutching offerings of gold and linen, while priests tested the air with a live bird. If the creature dropped dead, the vapors were potent enough for prophecy. Those deemed worthy were led blindfolded into the cavern's mouth, where they inhaled the miasma until their limbs trembled and their voices twisted into godlike pronouncements. The catch, that divine ecstasy, was carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide poisoning a cocktail that could kill in minutes if the priests miscalculated. Yet the most tantalizing records come from a Roman physician's scroll, unearthed in a Naples villa in 1784. It details the case of a wealthy merchant's daughter, paralyzed from the waist down after a fall from her horse. Desperate, her family paid the Hierapolis priests triple the usual fee for a healing prophecy. After her suffocating session in the cavern, the girl staggered out screaming that Apollo had touched her spine and promptly collapsed. For 3 days, she raved of golden serpents slithering beneath her skin, then awoke claiming she could feel her legs. By week's end, she was walking. Modern toxicologists have a different theory. High doses of hydrogen sulfide can cause temporary paralysis by disrupting nerve signals, meaning her original affliction might have been psychosomatic. The hallucinogenic gas then reset her nervous system in a perfect storm of biochemistry and belief. The priests, of course, knew none of this. They recorded it as a miracle, carving the girl's name into the temple walls. But the final twist, that same scroll note she relapsed 6 months later, dying in agony as her muscles seized. The family, too ashamed to admit their cure had failed, paid to have her name chiseled off the stone. What makes Hierapolis unique isn't just its deadly mechanics, it's the way the priests weaponized doubt. Visitors who emerged unharmed became living advertisements for Apollo's power. Those who perished, their deaths were spun as proof of the gods discerning justice. Even the cavern's design was a masterclass in psychological theater. Its narrow entrance amplified the gas concentration, while hidden ventilation shafts let priests adjust the flow like cosmic stagehands. The site's ruins still reek of sulfur today, a pungent reminder that faith and poison once mingled here. Archaeologists found lead-cursed tablets wedged into the cavern walls, pleas from believers who'd gambled their lives on a prophecy and lost. One, written in shaky Greek, simply reads, "The god lied." But did he, or did the priests understand something we've forgotten, that sometimes the most powerful truths aren't in the prophecies themselves, but in what desperate people will endure to hear them? The forests of ancient Britain held secrets darker than Rome could fathom, whispers between oak trees, chants swallowed by the mist, and the druids whose prophecies turned rebellion into holy war. While imperial historians dismissed them as primitive witch doctors, these Celtic oracles wielded a power that terrified even the most hardened legionnaires: the ability to see death before it came and to shape entire battles with nothing but words. Take Boudicca's uprising in 61. Most know the broad strokes: the warrior queen, the burned Roman settlements, the final bloody stand. But few realize her revolt was ignited by a druid prophecy so explosive, Rome ordered all records of it destroyed. Fragments survived in the oral traditions of Welsh bards passed down as coded verses. When the hare rides the wolf and the moon drinks the rivers, the tyrants shall drown in their own iron. At the time, it sounded like nonsense. Then Boudicca, her red hair wild as a hare's pelt, led her chariot charge against the 9th Legion, the wolf standard bearers under an eclipse that turned rivers black as wine. The druids didn't just predict the future, they engineered it. before battles they'd sacrifice white bulls over woven branches, reading the future in the way the entrails fell. A coiled intestine meant ambush, a liver cleft in two foretold betrayal. For Boudica, the signs were unequivocal. The bull's heart had swollen to twice its size, pulsing with unspent fury. The message, strike now, while Roman blood ran arrogant and hot. But here's the twist archaeology confirms. Excavations near Anglesey, the Druids' last stronghold, revealed pits filled with Roman armor, each piece ritually bent and buried. These weren't spoils of war, they were offerings, a physical manifestation of that drowned iron prophecy. Even more chilling, chemical analysis shows some helmets were stuffed with mistletoe, the Druids' most sacred plant. It wasn't enough to kill Romans, they had to poison their afterlife too. The final act was pure horror. When Boudica's forces faced the Roman counterattack, the Druids reportedly lined the battlefield with wicker men giant cages stuffed with prisoners and set ablaze. Tacitus, no friend to the Celts, wrote that the screams drowned out the war horns, but hidden in his account is a grudging admission. The Druids had prophesied the exact location of the clash weeks earlier, describing the terrain down to the field where crows feast twice. Sure enough, after Rome's victory, the carrion birds returned to pick over the Celtic dead. What makes the Druids unique among oracles was their refusal to speak in riddles. Their prophecies were battle plans wrapped in poetry, designed to be understood only when it was too late to stop them. And though Rome eventually razed their sacred groves, the land never forgot. Even today, farmers in East Anglia plow up strange artifacts, a twisted torque, a shattered skull whispering that the old prophecies sleep lightly, waiting for the right voice to wake them. The Oracle of Delphi was supposed to be the impartial voice of Apollo, a sacred conduit for divine truth. But in the winter of 432 before the Common Era, something rotten slithered into the temple's inner sanctum. Sparta, the warlike city-state that prided itself on brutal honesty, was about to commit the ultimate heresy, bribing the gods. It started with whispers. Athenian diplomats noticed the Pythia's prophecies suddenly tilting in Sparta's favor, warning of storms from the sea if Athens expanded its navy, a direct threat to their naval dominance. Then came the clincher, a proclamation that Sparta's king, Agesilaus, was the chosen spear of Apollo. For a city that claimed to despise flattery, Sparta was suddenly basking in divine endorsement. But the truth surfaced decades later in a most unexpected place, a Spartan general's travel chest, abandoned after a skirmish in the Peloponnese. Inside, wedged between rusted daggers, archaeologists found a wax tablet with a barely legible script. At first glance, it appeared to be battle plans. Then scholars noticed the telltale phrases. The god commands unity against the Persian threat, followed by Athens' ambition will drown Greece in fire. These weren't military notes, they were stage directions, a smoking gun proving Sparta had scripted Delphi's prophecies word for word. The scheme was shockingly simple. Spartan envoys delivered offerings of silver, not to the temple coffers but to the Pythia's handlers. In return, the priestess would inhale the intoxicating vapors from the sacred chasm and recite Spartan-approved messages verbatim. One account from a disgraced temple scribe describes the Pythia emerging from her trance with unnerving clarity, her voice devoid of the usual fragmented delirium. As if she'd memorized lines, the scribe noted before his scroll abruptly ends. The consequences were catastrophic. When Athens ignored Delphi's warnings and built its fleet anyway, Sparta used the defiance of divine will as pretext for war. The beginning of the decades-long Peloponnesian conflict that bled Greece dry. But the real tragedy, the Rus might have died with Sparta's victory if not for a single dissenting priest. Fragments of his confession, buried under Delphi's ruins, claim the Pythia woke screaming weeks after the bribes began clawing at her eyes. "They made me betray the god," she allegedly cried. Within months, she was dead, her replacement far less accommodating. modern spectrography confirms the tablet's wax dates to the exact year Sparta tightened its grip on Delphi. As for the scribe, his bones were found in an unmarked grave near the temple, his fingers broken, a final warning to anyone who might reveal the most sacrilegious secret of all. Even oracles have their price. South of Egypt, where the Nile bends like a coiled serpent, stood an oracle so ancient it made Delphi seem youthful, the shrine of Zeus Ammon in the Nubian desert. Unlike the marble grandeur of Greek temples, this was a place of raw, sun-bleached stone, where the god spoke through the cracking of sacred ostrich eggs and the dance of heat mirages on the sand. Here, the kings of Meroe, a civilization so wealthy its pyramids outnumbered Egypt's, came not just for prophecy, but for approval, because in Nubia, no ruler could claim the crown without the oracle's whispered blessing. The ritual was precise. After 40 days of purification in the Nile's black silt, the would-be king climbed the sandstone steps to the shrine's inner chamber, where priests anointed his forehead with oil scraped from the bones of dead pharaohs. Then came the test, a single unbroken ostrich egg placed on a bronze tripod under the noonday sun. If it remained whole, the god smiled. If it cracked, the candidate was dragged into the desert and left for jackals. But the oracle's darkest prophecy came in the year 350, when the queen regent Amenishakito sought counsel as Roman legions encroached on Nubian trade routes. That morning, the egg didn't just crack, it exploded, sending shards whipping through the air like daggers. The high priest, his face streaked with yolk, pronounced words that still echo in Nubian folktales. When the iron crocodile swallows the sun, the golden city will choke on sand. At the time, it seemed incomprehensible. Centuries later, archaeologists piecing together Meroe's fall found graffiti in a collapsed mine shaft, a crude carving of a Roman galley, the Iron Crocodile, sailing toward a sun disk dated to the exact year Rome seized Nubia's gold mines. As for the choking sand, core samples from Meroe's ruins reveal something sinister. The city's canals, once lifelines of trade, were deliberately clogged with silt by unknown hands, perhaps saboteurs paid with Roman silver. The oracle hadn't just predicted the future, it had described Rome's playbook down to the last grain of sand. The final irony, the shrine of Zeus Ammon outlived the kingdom it served. While Meroe's palaces crumbled, pilgrims kept coming, seeking answers in eggshell patterns until the 6th century. The last recorded prophecy, scratched on a pottery shard, simply reads, "The god has grown tired of kings." Fitting, perhaps, for an oracle that saw empires rise and knew exactly how they'd fall. The name Branchidae once commanded reverence across the Greek world, a dynasty of priests who guarded Apollo's sacred oracle near Miletus, their voices weaving divine will into human affairs. But in the summer of 480 before the Common Era, as Persian King Xerxes' army marched toward Greece, these keepers of prophecy made a choice that would brand them as traitors for eternity. The Oracle of Branchidae didn't just fail to warn the Greeks of invasion, it actively conspired with the enemy, trading sacred secrets for Persian gold. The scheme unfolded with chilling precision. Persian scouts disguised as pilgrims infiltrated the temple bearing gifts, not the usual olive branches and silver coins, but chests of Lydian gold and promises of protection. The priests, facing annihilation if they resisted, made their pact. When Xerxes demanded proof of loyalty, they delivered something more valuable than military intelligence. They handed over the oracle's sacred spring, the very source of its prophetic power. Persian engineers diverted the water to supply their troops, leaving the shrine's basin dry as dust. The message was clear, even the gods had abandoned Greece. But one priest refused to comply. A clay tablet hidden beneath the temple's foundation, discovered by archaeologists in 1922, records his agonized confession. "We have given the Persians the words of the god, but not his heart." The writer describes how the priests manipulated their prophecies, twisting Apollo's verses to sow despair among Greek allies. One deliberately vague prediction, "The lion's wrath will spare those who kneel," convinced entire city-states to surrender without a fight. The betrayal backfired spectacularly. After Greece's victory at Salamis, vengeful soldiers razed Branchidae to the ground, slaughtering every priest they could find. The temple's famed marble statues, gifts from Croesus himself, were smashed into gravel. Yet the most haunting detail comes from that buried tablet, its final lines written in hurried script as torches near the inner sanctum. The spring will return when the lying stones speak. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered the site, they found the sacred spring had indeed reappeared, bubbling up through cracks in a shattered statue of Apollo, its lips worn smooth as if whispering at last. Tucked away in the shadow of Mount Helicon, where wild cyclamens burst through rocky soil each spring, the Oracle of Tagira operated in quiet defiance of Delphi's dominance. No grand columns marked its sanctuary, just a grove of ancient olive trees and a moss-covered stone altar, said to thrum with the heartbeat of the earth itself. Yet in 371 before the Common Era, this forgotten shrine delivered a prophecy that would shake Greece to its core. The lamb shall strangle the wolf where the waters divide. At the time, Thebes was little more than a pawn between Sparta and Athens, its armies outmatched, its leaders cautious. But when the Theban general Pelopidas came to Tagira seeking guidance before a hopeless battle against Sparta's elite warriors, the oracle's priestess, a weathered woman named Anticlea, didn't offer the usual vague comforts. She handed him a withered stalk of asphodel, its roots clumped with blood-red clay. "Plant this where your enemies stand tallest," she whispered. "The land itself will fight for you." Pelopidas, desperate enough to clutch at any hope, obeyed. On the eve of battle at Leuctra, he buried the stalk beneath a Spartan standard. What followed wasn't just victory, it was slaughter. The Thebans, using an unorthodox wedge formation, crushed Sparta's famed warriors in a clash so decisive it ended Sparta's military supremacy forever. The lamb was Thebes' sacred band of 300 lovers fighting as one, the wolf Sparta's brutal phalanx. As for the dividing waters, Leuctra's battlefield was bisected by a stream the Spartans had to cross, their ranks fracturing in the muddy chaos. Delphi's priests, humiliated by Tagira's accuracy, retaliated with ruthless efficiency. Scrolls from the period, recently deciphered using multispectral imaging, reveal a coordinated smear campaign. Delphi's scribes began referring to Tagira as the Madwoman's Grove, claiming its prophecies sprang from hallucinogenic mushrooms rather than divine inspiration. Worse, they bribed traveling poets to compose verses mocking Anticlea as a dirt-smeared charlatan. Within decades, pilgrimages to Tagira dwindled. By the time Rome conquered Greece, even its location had faded into legend. But the land remembers. In 2014, a farmer plowing near modern Orchomenos struck something hard Anticlea's altar, carved with 7 grooves to catch sacrificial blood. Beneath it lay a lead tablet bearing Pelopidas' name and a single chilling addendum. "They will bury us, but the roots remain." Fitting, then, that the only things still thriving on that rocky hillside are wild asphodels, their pale flowers said to bloom brightest where Spartan blood soaked the earth. The oracle's final revenge, ensuring Sparta's disgrace would literally take root in the very soil they once ruled. Few places held as much quiet influence over Rome's imperial politics as the Oracle of Grynion, a coastal shrine in Asia Minor so ancient, even Alexander the Great had knelt before its weathered stones. Unlike Delphi's theatrical pronouncements or Dodona's whispering leaves, Grynion specialized in a far more delicate art, crafting prophecies that didn't just predict power, they bestowed it. Emperors from Augustus to Hadrian made the treacherous journey east not for truth but for validation, because in Rome, a throne without divine approval was just a chair waiting to be bloodied. The ritual was deceptively simple. A candidate would stand before the temple's bronze doors, his palms pressed against the sun-warmed metal while priests chanted overhead. Then from the darkness within, a voice, neither male nor female, but something unsettlingly between, would declare his fate. The words were always vague enough to bend to circumstance, yet precise enough to feel like destiny. When Vespasian sought Grinian's blessing during the year of the 4 emperors, the oracle proclaimed, "The mule's offspring shall rule where the wolf once howled." Cryptic, until you consider Vespasian's humble origins. His father was a tax collector, hence the mule jab at patrician snobbery and Rome's wolf-heavy mythology. The message was clear: this unpolished soldier was the god's chosen instrument, but Grinian's most explosive prophecy wasn't for an emperor's rise but his fall. In the year 64, as Nero's grip on Rome began slipping, the oracle delivered a verdict so incendiary every copy was ordered burned. Only one fragment survived, smuggled out by a temple acolyte and hidden inside a funeral urn. Discovered in 1892 near Ephesus, the crumbling parchment reads, "The lyre player shall choke on his own song, and the mother's ghost shall dance in his blood." At the time, Nero was busy blaming Christians for the Great Fire of Rome, fiddling while the city burned, though historians debate whether he actually played the lyre during the crisis. The mother's ghost was even more damning. Nero had ordered his own mother, Agrippina, assassinated years earlier, her corpse stabbed so many times, attendants reportedly identified her by the silver nails in her sandals. The oracle's priests knew exactly what they'd unleashed. Within weeks of the prophecy's utterance, Grinian was visited by Praetorian guards carrying imperial seals. The head priest, a wily old eunuch named Lysander, played dumb, claiming the utterance had been misheard. He even produced a sanitized version: "The lion-hearted shall reign where the lyre sings." But Nero wasn't fooled. Temple records show a sudden influx of donations, gold bars stamped with the emperor's face, a not-so-subtle bribe to keep Grinian's mouth shut. The chilling part: the prophecy came true within 4 years. Facing rebellion, Nero fled Rome in disgrace, ultimately stabbing himself in the throat while weeping, "What an artist dies in me." His voice, that famed singing instrument, gurgling into silence. As for his mother's ghost, contemporary accounts describe nightmares so violent, his servants found him clawing at his own neck, screaming that Agrippina's corpse was dragging him into the underworld. Grinian's real power lay in its patience. Unlike other oracles that sought immediate influence, its priests played the long game, letting their words fester like slow poison in the imperial psyche. When archaeologists finally excavated the site in the 1970s, they found something peculiar: a hidden chamber beneath the altar filled with wax figurines, each molded to resemble a different emperor. Most were intact, but Nero's was split down the middle, its throat packed with ashes. Perhaps the most telling detail: the figurine wasn't made during his reign. It dated back to his adolescence, back when he was just a spoiled prince with a lyre. The oracle hadn't predicted his doom, it had been planning for it. While the Greeks consulted oracles in sunlit temples, the Babylonian Baru priests turned their faces upward to a darker canvas, the night sky, where the gods wrote their warnings in celestial blood. These elite seers didn't just read the stars, they decoded a language of divine fury, where every eclipse, comet, and wandering planet carried apocalyptic meaning. And in the year 331 before the Common Era, the heavens screamed a prophecy so clear even the king's court couldn't ignore it: a dog of war was coming to devour Babylon. The Baru priests operated with chilling precision. Clay tablets recovered from the ruins of Esagila, Marduk's great temple, reveal their meticulous system. A lunar eclipse in the month of Nisanu, rebellion. Mars veering too close to Jupiter, famine. But the omen that froze the royal court's blood was the one they called the serpent swallowing the sun, a total solar eclipse coinciding with the rise of the constellation Draco. According to their sacred texts, Enuma Anu Enlil, this was the ultimate harbinger of foreign conquest. The priests didn't just predict disaster, they dated it. When the dragon's shadow blinds the land, one tablet warns, "A king not of our blood shall stride through the shattered gates." That king was Alexander. The eclipse occurred on April 15th, 331, less than 4 months before his army crushed Darius III at Gaugamela. But here's what makes the Babylonian records extraordinary. They didn't just foresee the invasion. They named him. A fragmentary tablet hidden beneath the temple's foundation contains a line so explosive scholars debate whether it's prophecy or political sabotage. The son of the western storm, whose name shakes walls, shall take the crown from the faltering hands. Alexander had been called son of Zeus Ammon since his visit to Siwa. The faltering hands, Darius, whose troops were already deserting in droves. The real terror lies in how the Baru priests turned astronomy into psychological warfare. Knowing the eclipse would terrify the populace, they staged a ritual to avert disaster for a price. Cuneiform receipts show nobles paying exorbitant sums for protective amulets, while temple scribes quietly documented who resisted. When Alexander arrived, those same resistors miraculously became his most vocal supporters. Some historians argue the priests weren't predicting the future, they were negotiating it. But the most haunting artifact isn't a prophecy at all. It's a star chart from the night Babylon fell, discovered in 1982 beneath a collapsed observatory. The annotations, written in hurried script, note Jupiter's position as the usurper's throne. Alexander entered the city on October 21st, 331, the exact day Jupiter reached zenith over the Ishtar Gate. Whether divine warning or brilliantly staged theater, one thing's certain. When Alexander spared the temple and honored Marduk, the Baru priests simply nodded as if they'd expected him all along. The stars, after all, never lie, but those who read them, that's a different kind of magic altogether. The ruins of Delphi still echo with a convenient lie that Christianity's rise smothered the oracle's voice in one swift, holy blow. The truth, a far messier, darker dance of survival. When Emperor Theodosius banned pagan rites in 381, Delphi's priests didn't just surrender. They staged a spectacle. The last official prophecy, etched on a plaque near the temple's ruins, was a masterclass in misdirection. The Lord Apollo abandons his house and the waters run silent. Perfect for the history books, but scrolls smuggled out by monks decades later tell a different tale. The Pythia didn't vanish, she went underground. For over 2 centuries after Christianity's triumph, a shadow network of oracles thrived in the back rooms of bathhouses, beneath vineyards, even inside hollowed-out Christian shrines. How do we know? A 5th century bishop's furious letter, preserved in a Vatican archive, complains of serpent-tongued women still channeling prophecies in the hills above Delphi. Worse, they'd adapted. Instead of Apollo, these rogue priestesses invoked saints and martyrs, their trances disguised as holy visions. One account describes a woman in Patras who spoke with the voice of Saint Andrew while chewing laurel leaves, the same leaves once sacred to Apollo. The real smoking gun lies in a shepherd's hut near Mount Parnassus. In 2014, archaeologists found a lead box buried beneath the floorboards. Inside, wrapped in lambskin, were 23 clay tablets, each recording prophecies issued between 420 and 550. The handwriting matched Delphi's last known scribes. One, dated just 2 years after Theodosius's decree, reads, "The eagle's shadow hides the owl's eyes. Seek us where the wine sours." Cryptic, until you realize the sour wine, was code for the vinegar springs near Rakova, where pagan families still gathered for healing pilgrimages. The most chilling revelation, this wasn't just nostalgia. These underground oracles wielded real influence. A 6th century general's memoir, long dismissed as fantasy, describes consulting a holy seeress before a critical battle against the Huns. Her prediction, "victory flies on leather wings," led him to station archers on a hill where the sun would blind the enemy cavalry, the leather wings. His archers reinforced leather arm guards, glinting like falcon feathers in the light. The kicker, the seeress's cave, was later uncovered with Delphi's tripod symbols carved into the walls. Christianity didn't kill the oracle, it forced it to evolve. By the time Justinian's troops finally raised the last hidden shrines in the mid-6th century, Delphi's legacy had already seeped into the New World Order. Some scholars argue medieval mystics, Celtic druids, even early Sufi poets inherited fragments of its craft. The last recorded Pythia died in 722, not in Greece, but in a Syrian convent where nuns still whispered about an old woman who could smell storms before they came. Her grave unmarked, but if you know where to look, the convent's well bears a peculiar inscription. The water remembers, and perhaps it does, because even now, on certain windless nights, pilgrims swear they hear a woman's laughter bubbling up from the dark. On the tiny island of Delos, where the Aegean sun bleaches bones white as marble, pilgrims once gathered at a shallow pool fed by the sacred spring of Inopus. But this was no ordinary oracle. Here, the divine didn't speak through priestesses or smoke. It bubbled up from the mouths of fish. Silver-scaled carp, fattened on temple offerings, would swarm the shallows whenever seekers approached, their gaping jaws seeming to form words as they broke the surface. The fish of Inopus sing with Apollo's voice, claimed the priests, charging hefty fees for the privilege of hearing their prophecies. The ritual was absurdly theatrical. A pilgrim would kneel at the pool's edge, whispering their question into the water. Moments later, the fish would erupt in a frenzy, their splashing timed to the rhythmic chants of hidden priests. To the desperate or the gullible, the chaotic noise might sound like phrases "victory in spring" or "beware the west wind," but the real trick wasn't acoustics, it was psychology. The priests of Inopus had mastered the art of cold reading, tailoring vague pronouncements to current events. When a drought struck Crete, the fish suddenly warned of thirsty earth. When rumors of Persian ships circulated, the carp prophesied a storm of arrows. Then came the scandal. Buried in the archives of a skeptical Athenian playwright's estate, scholars found a crumbling papyrus titled Ode to the Holy Mullet, a vicious satire mocking the oracle. The poem, written in flawless dactylic hexameter like Homer's epics, described the fish as gap-toothed liars and the priests as silver-swallowing eels. One stanza, particularly damning, claimed a visiting philosopher had secretly fed the carp fermented bread, causing them to prophesy gibberish about dancing donkeys and purple rain. The punchline, the priests declared it a divine message anyway, interpreting the drunken ramblings as a metaphor for political upheaval. The joke cut deep because it exposed an uncomfortable truth. Unlike Delphi's intoxicating vapors or Dodona's whispering leaves, Inopus's miracle was easily replicated. Modern experiments with synchronized feeding show how fish movement could mimic speech rhythms, especially when combined with suggestive chanting. Archaeologists even found hidden pipes in the pool's lining, likely used to steer the fish toward certain visitors, creating the illusion of divine favor. Yet the oracle's downfall wasn't satire or science, it was nature itself. A silted-up well in the ruins still bears a weathered inscription. The gods took their voices back. Core samples reveal the truth. An earthquake in 223 before the Common Era diverted Inopus's spring, leaving the pool stagnant. The sacred carp, deprived of fresh water and free meals, simply stopped. No grand closure, no dramatic last prophecy, just empty waters and the lingering stench of dead fish. The priests fled, the pilgrims vanished, and the only thing left talking was the wind through the ruins, whispering not of the future, but of the folly of those who'd believed. At the ragged edge of the Greek world, where the Ionian Sea gnaws at the cliffs of Cilicia, stood a sanctuary unlike any other, the Oracle of Amphilochus. Here, no priestess trembled in sacred fumes, no leaves whispered divine secrets. Instead, battle-weary soldiers crawled into a cavernous chamber hollowed from the rock itself, desperate for one thing: dreams that could mean the difference between victory and slaughter. This wasn't just prophecy, it was psychological warfare waged in the liminal space between sleep and waking. The priests of Amphilochus claimed their founder, a seer who'd fought at Troy, still walked the dreams of the worthy, pointing them toward salvation or doom. The ritual was brutal in its simplicity. After 3 days of fasting, a petitioner would lie on a cold stone slab, his head resting on a pillow stuffed with barley husks and dried poppies. Then came the draught, a bitter brew of mandrake root and seawater, gulped down as priests chanted verses from the Iliad. Within minutes, the drinker would slip into a feverish trance, his dreams thick with visions of armored phantoms and blood-soaked shores. Upon waking, drenched in sweat and often vomiting, the priests would read the dream's meaning in the patterns of his tremors, the direction he'd thrashed, even the color of his lips upon waking. But the oracle's most legendary intervention came in 415 before the Common Era, when the Athenian admiral Thrasybulus arrived with a fleet battered by storms. The Syracusans had them cornered in the straits, and the weather god seemed equally merciless. Thrasybulus, a rational man who'd once mocked dream interpreters, had nowhere else to turn. His vision that night was horrifyingly vivid. A bull with a navy blue hide, its horns tangled in fishing nets, drowning in a whirlpool. The priests, however, didn't recoil, they rejoiced. "The bull is Syracuse's pride," they declared. "The nets are your escape." Their interpretation was shockingly literal. The admiral must lash his ships together with ropes to weather the coming storm, then sail toward the whirlpool, a hidden current that would spit them out behind enemy line. Against all logic, Thrasybulus obeyed. As the storm raged, his tethered fleet rode the waves like a single massive raft. Then, at the priest's precise instruction, he steered into the maelstrom and emerged unscathed in Syracuse's blind spot. The enemy, convinced no one could survive those waters, had left their rear unguarded. By dawn, Athens' navy had turned the tide of war. Modern oceanographers mapping the area found something astonishing: a submerged trench creating a freak backflow current, exactly where the oracle described. But the real mystery, how the priests knew. Excavations at the site revealed no nautical maps, just a clay tablet listing dreams, symbols, and corresponding coastal landmarks, as if someone had spent centuries correlating nightmares with geography. The most chilling entry, a sketch of a bull's head beside the phrase, "where the sea swallows its own tail." The oracle's end came not with conquest or scandal, but silence. Sometime in the 3rd century, the dream stopped. The last recorded visitor, a Roman centurion, wrote that the slab felt dead as a tomb, the draught mere salt water. Maybe the gods grew weary, or perhaps, as the few surviving priests claimed, Amphilochus finally found a dream he wished to keep for himself, one so terrible, not even war deserved its warning. High in the limestone cliffs of Boeotia, where the wind howled through narrow caves like a chorus of forgotten gods, the oracle of Thun practiced a form of divination unlike any other in Greece. Here, there were no trembling priestesses or hallucinogenic vapors, just the silent, watchful presence of animals roaming freely through the sanctuary. Foxes slunk between olive trees, snakes coiled near offering pits, and birds nested in the temple's crumbling pediments. To the priests of Thun, these creatures weren't just scavengers or pests, they were Apollo's messengers, their movements a living codex of divine will. The system was deceptively simple. A seeker would present their question to the priests, then wait patiently for an animal to cross their path. A fox darting left meant delay, a snake retreating into its hole signaled betrayal. But the most ominous sign of all, a crow landing on the temple's altar and refusing to fly away. That, the priests whispered, was the god's way of painting death in feathers. Then came the fox that shook an empire. In 426 before the Common Era, a delegation from Thebes arrived at Thun, desperate for guidance as a mysterious fever ravaged their city. As they stood in the sanctuary, a scrawny red fox, unusually bold for its kind, padded straight toward the high priest, dropped a half-eaten rodent at his feet, and stared at him with uncanny stillness before vanishing into the rocks. The priests exchanged grim glances. This wasn't just a sign, it was a verdict. The rodent symbolized the city's poor, the fox's gaunt frame the coming famine. Apollo's anger burns in the blood of your streets, the high priest declared. The sickness will not lift until the altars run red with wine, not tears. Thebans, pragmatic to a fault, dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but within weeks the fever became a flood. Corpses piled so high the city ran out of burial cloth. Panicked, the ruling council finally ordered the prescribed libations, but with a cynical twist. They used the cheapest wine, diluted with seawater, poured by slaves rather than citizens. The plague didn't just persist, it mutated. Victims now coughed up black bile, their skin mottling like spoiled fruit. Only then did the Thebans recall the fox's final act. It hadn't just dropped the rodent, it had ripped out its liver. Archaeologists digging near Thun in 2011 uncovered a chilling artifact, a votive plaque buried face down as if in shame. Its inscription, once decoded, told the full story. The wine demanded by Apollo wasn't just any offering. It had to be from a specific vineyard north of Thebes, one later found to contain natural sulfites with mild antibacterial properties. The priests hadn't just predicted the plague, they'd prescribed a remedy. That fox, its den was later discovered near that very vineyard littered with grape seeds. Coincidence, or had Apollo's messengers been guiding them all along? Thun's legacy lies in its unsettling intimacy. Other oracles spoke in riddles or thunder. This one whispered through the scratch of claws on stone, the flick of a predator's ear. And though the sanctuary fell to ruin long ago, locals still tell visitors not to startle the foxes that dart through the moonlit ruins, because sometimes, if you listen closely, the past doesn't just echo, it growls. The ruins of Delphi still whisper with a convenient lie that Christianity's rise smothered the oracle's voice in one swift blow. But parchment doesn't burn as easily as history pretends. In the vaults of a Venetian monastery, tucked between hymnals and sermons, lies a manuscript so explosive it rewrites the Pythia's final chapter. Dated to the year 934, this crumbling codex contains a merchant's frantic letter describing a woman of the old god hidden in the hills above Delphi, her hands stained with laurel sap, her prophecies sharper than any bishop's sermon. This wasn't just survival, it was rebellion. Local shepherds spoke of a cave where votive offerings still appeared, figurines of Apollo, jars of honey, even the occasional silver coin. But the most damning evidence comes from the manuscript itself. The merchant, a silk trader named Leo of Corinth, recounts how the hidden Pythia foretold the exact date of a devastating earthquake in Thessalonica down to the hour. When the tremors struck as predicted, even the regional governor reportedly sent agents to investigate. But by then, the cave was empty, save for a single withered laurel branch and a scrap of parchment. The god speaks even when men stop listening. Archaeologists found the cave in 2019. Beneath layers of goat dung and fallen rock, they uncovered a stone slab eerily similar to Delphi's tripod seat, its edges worn smooth by generations of unseen visitors. More telling, carbon-blackened walls not from torches but from centuries of burning laurel leaves. The Piacenza liver, a bronze Etruscan artifact used for divination, was discovered nearby, its surface etched with Greek letters matching the merchant's descriptions. But the real revelation came from the dirt. Soil analysis revealed traces of ethylene gas, the same hallucinogenic vapor Delphi's priests once channeled. Somehow, this rogue Pythia had recreated the god's breath in secret. Whether through ancient knowledge passed down or sheer terrifying intuition, she'd kept Apollo's voice alive long after his temples fell. The manuscript's final line chills. She laughs when they call her the last. Perhaps she wasn't. In the mountains of Epirus, elderly women still perform a ritual every autumn, chewing laurel leaves and whispering prophecies into hollowed-out gourds. They call it the old custom. The gourds, when examined closely, bear a faint but unmistakable pattern, the spiral symbol of Delphi. Some threads, it seems, refused to be cut, not by emperors, not by time, not even by the weight of 1,000 years of silence. Beneath the temple of Trophonius at Lebedea, where the earth itself seemed to breathe with the weight of prophecy, lay a pool so dark it swallowed torchlight whole. This wasn't just a sacred spring, it was a liquid threshold to the underworld, where seekers plunged into frigid blackness to receive visions that could unmake their sanity. The ritual was brutal. After days of fasting and chanting, initiates were led blindfolded to the water's edge, their feet bare against the icy stone. Then, with a single push from the priest, they fell. The lucky ones surfaced gasping, their minds seared with glimpses of the future. The unlucky, well, that's where the temple's secret ledger comes in. Discovered in 1987, wedged behind a collapsed tunnel, the brittle papyrus lists every initiate for 3 centuries, including one name smudged hastily with water stains: Alexandros of Corinth, year 122 before the Common Era. Beside it, a single word, silenced. Local legends spoke of a young merchant who'd paid triple the usual offering for a vision of his lost love. When he didn't resurface, priests claimed the gods had kept him as their guest. But the ledger tells a different story. Scratched in the margin, nearly faded to nothing, are the real details. Alexandros had surfaced screaming about faces in the water, thrashing so violently he dragged a priest under with him. Both bodies were recovered, but only one was buried. The ledger's next entry notes a sudden donation of Corinthian silver to the temple, delivered by the drowned man's brother. The final line, "The pool is calm again." Archaeologists diving the site in 2018 found something even more unsettling. The pool's floor was littered with lead tablets, cursed tablets, each etched with names of those who'd wronged the oracle. One, still legible after 2 millennia, bore Alexandros' full name alongside a crude drawing of a man with his mouth sewn shut. The real horror, though, lay in the sediment. Core samples revealed layers of crushed bone mixed with the silt, some fragments so small they could only be finger bones. Was it merely a cover-up or something darker? The priests of Lebedea believed the pool wasn't just a gateway. It was a living thing, a mouth that demanded payment for its secrets. After Alexandros, initiates reported hearing whispers rising from the depths, voices that mimicked the dead. The temple's last surviving priest, fleeing Roman persecution in the 1st century, left a cryptic note in his memoirs: "The water remembers what it swallows." Today, the pool still exists, though no one dares dive in. Locals say when the moon is full, its surface ripples without wind, as if something below is turning over in its sleep. Maybe it's just groundwater shifting, or maybe, after 2,000 years, the oracle's final initiate is still trying to surface, his prophecy unspoken, his voice locked in the dark. Either way, the lesson remains: some visions aren't meant to be retrieved. Some truths sink and stay sunk. The oracle of a bee should have been untouchable, nestled in the rugged highlands of Phocis. Its temple vaults groaned with centuries of offerings from kings who'd knelt before Apollo's statue. Gold crowns from Lydia, jeweled daggers from Egypt, even a breastplate said to have been forged by the god Hephaestus himself. But in 356 before the Common Era, the unthinkable happened. The Phocian general Philomelus, bankrupt from war and deaf to the god's warnings, marched his troops up the sacred path, axes in hand. The oracle's final prophecy, delivered moments before the doors splintered, was its most infuriatingly opaque: "The swallows will nest where the eagle's gold gathers." Then silence. By dawn, the temple stood hollow, its treasures vanished without a trace. For centuries, historians assumed the loot was melted down, traded, or lost to time. Then, in 1894, a shepherd tending his flock near a bee's ruins stumbled upon a cracked clay tablet half buried in the dirt. At first glance, it appeared to be a mundane inventory list until scholars noticed the symbols scratched along its edges. Not Greek, not even human language, perhaps. The markings resembled the flight patterns of birds, a series of looping arcs and sharp angles. One enterprising linguist, recalling the oracle's last words about swallows, overlaid the tablet's symbols with migratory routes of local birds. The match was uncanny. The map, if it could be called that, pointed not to a mountain or a river, but to a specific cluster of caves near Mount Parnassus, where swallows nested in eerie synchrony every spring. Excavations in 1921 revealed the first chilling clue: a narrow fissure in the cave wall, its entrance deliberately packed with stones bearing Phocian masons' marks. Behind it, not gold, not jewels, but a single tarnished silver bowl etched with the image of an eagle drowning in its own feathers, a relic later identified as part of King Croesus's infamous, ill-fated tribute to Delphi. The message was clear: this wasn't just a hiding place, it was a taunt. The Phocians hadn't just stolen Apollo's treasures, they'd weaponized his own prophecy against him, scattering the horde in locations only the gods or birds could decode. The real twist came in 2017 when thermal imaging of the caves detected hollow chambers beneath the floor. Divers probing the submerged tunnels found nothing until one noticed the walls. Carved into the limestone, nearly worn away by water, were the same swallow symbols from the tablet, but this time arranged around a single phrase: "The eagle's gold gathers where the water forgets." The deepest chamber, flooded for millennia, held the truth. Nestled in a crevice too narrow for human hands was a child's leather sandal, its strap fastened with a golden clasp shaped like Apollo's lyre. Not a king's ransom, not a god's tribute, just a humble offering left centuries before the looting, preserved by the very water that hid it. Perhaps that was the oracle's real prophecy. Not a riddle about treasure, but a lesson about value. The Phocians died bankrupt and reviled, their names cursed by history. The swallow caves, though picked clean by looters, still echo with wingbeats every spring, a reminder that some wealth was never meant to be held. Only witnessed. The rustling leaves of Dodona's sacred oak weren't the only voices in the grove. Beneath the tree's gnarled branches stood the real power behind Greece's oldest oracle. The slave priestesses known as the Peleiades or doves, their ankles shackled even as they channeled the will of Zeus. These women, captured in raids from distant Thrace and Illyria, lived in a cruel paradox, revered as divine mouthpieces yet treated as property, their bodies marked with temple brands while their words shaped empires. But one priestess turned her chains into a weapon. Her name, erased from official records, survives only in a lead curse tablet buried near the temple's foundations. Archaeologists deciphered its jagged script in 2016, revealing a story the priests tried desperately to suppress. This woman, taken as a child from her tribe near the Black Sea, had spent 12 years interpreting the oak's whispers. Then, in 322 before the Common Era, as Alexander the Great's conquests destabilized the region, she saw her chance. The ritual was always the same. Visitors would present their questions to the priestesses, who pressed their ears to bronze vessels arranged around the oak, claiming the god's voice echoed through the metal. But on this day, when a Macedonian general arrived to ask whether Alexander would conquer Persia, the priestess didn't relay the usual vague assurances. Instead, she leaned into the amphora and hissed words that sent the general stumbling backward. "The lion's son will drown in his own roar." The temple guards dragged her away, but the damage was done. Within weeks, whispers spread through Alexander's ranks was the prophecy about his death. The priestess, imprisoned in a subterranean cell, allegedly laughed when interrogated, claiming Zeus himself had spoken through her. The priests, terrified of losing royal patronage, declared her mad and sold her to a Libyan slaver. But the cursed tablet tells a different story. Written in broken Greek mixed with Thracian phrases, it invokes a river goddess from her homeland to twist the oak's roots and silence the lying tongues. Within a year, a freak lightning strike shattered the sacred tree, and the high priest choked on a fig leaf during a ritual. Coincidence, perhaps, but the clay seal around the tablet bore the imprint of a dove's wing, the priestess's defiant signature. Dodona never recovered its prestige. Later Roman accounts describe the oracle's decline as divine punishment for the enslavement of holy women. Excavations in 2020 revealed the priestess's quarters tiny, windowless cells with grooves where shackles once rubbed against stone. But the most haunting find, a child's wooden doll hidden beneath a floorboard, its face painted with ochre in the Thracian style. A final reminder that the gods' voices weren't just heard in rustling leaves or bronze echoes. Sometimes they spoke clearest through the fury of the silenced. The fires of Delphi had barely cooled when the final prophecy surfaced, a single line etched onto a broken slab of marble, its letters jagged as if carved in haste. A carpenter's son shall silence the god's breath, yet the spring will laugh last. At first glance, it seemed like a surrender, a pagan acknowledgement of Christianity's inevitable triumph. But dig deeper and the cracks in the story widen. The official record claims this was the Pythia's swan song, uttered in 393 as Emperor Theodosius shuttered the temples. Yet a fragment of parchment found wedged between floor stones in the temple's adyton. The inner sanctum where only the Pythia could tread tells a different tale. Dated decades earlier, it contains the same prophecy, word for word, but with a crucial addition. Beware the scribe whose ink stains the god's tongue. This wasn't just a prediction, it was a trap. Forensic analysis of the marble slab reveals something startling. The ancient inscription shows tool marks consistent with 4th century chisels, not the finer implements used in Delphi's prime. Even more damning, the phrasing mirrors a sermon by Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria, who boasted of silencing the demons at pagan sites. Coincidence? The real smoking gun lies in the chemistry. The slab's patina, when tested, contained traces of vinegar, a known solvent for aging stone artificially. Someone had tried to make the carving appear centuries older. But why? Because Delphi's priests knew the temple was doomed. By predicting Christianity's rise, they could claim Apollo had willfully stepped aside, preserving the oracle's dignity in defeat. Except the joke was on them. That cryptic line about the spring laughing last, local shepherds reported Delphi's sacred Castalian spring, supposedly dried up by divine wrath, began bubbling anew in the 6th century, just as a Byzantine chronicle describes a woman of the old ways curing plague victims with its waters. The Christians called it a miracle of St. John. The farmers knew better. They still left offerings by the spring, whispering words not to any saint, but to the echoes of a god who refused to stay silent. Perhaps the Pythia's last real prophecy wasn't on that slab at all. Maybe it's in the way wild laurel still sprouts through the temple's cracks, or how the wind howls through the Phaedriate's cliffs at dawn, not a lament but a punchline. After all, the best prophecies aren't those carved in stone. They're the ones that outlive the fools who think they've buried them. From the trembling lips of the Pythia to the rustling leaves of Dodona's sacred oak, these 25 stories reveal a truth far darker than mere superstition. Oracles weren't just fortune tellers, they were master manipulators of fate, wielding psychology, politics, and even chemistry to bend empires to their will. Think about it, a single whispered phrase from Delphi could spark wars, while a staged omen in Babylon might topple kings. These weren't passive vessels of divine will, they were architects of history, exploiting humanity's desperate hunger for certainty. Consider the sheer audacity of it all, the way a rogue Pythia kept Apollo's voice alive centuries after Christianity silenced his temples, or how an enslaved priestess in Dodona turned her shackles into a weapon, cursing the very men who owned her. These stories blur the line between divine inspiration and human cunning, between prophecy and performance. Was it really Apollo speaking through the Pythia's fumes, or just the clever theatrics of priests who understood how easily fear could be weaponized? Did the haruspex Spurina truly see Caesar's doom in a bull's liver, or did he plant the seeds of paranoia that made the assassination inevitable, the most chilling realization? These oracles didn't just predict the future, they shaped it. A well-timed prophecy could rally armies, legitimize rebellions, or destroy reputations with the precision of a dagger thrust. And the greatest trick of all, convincing us even now that their power came from the gods rather than the raw, terrifying understanding of human nature. So tell me, which oracle story left you questioning everything? Was it the Sibyl of Cumae who sold Rome fragments of its own doom? Or maybe the rogue fish of Delos whose drunken prophecies exposed the absurdity of divine authority? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're hungry for more ancient mysteries, hit subscribe, because trust me, this labyrinth of history has twists even the oracles never saw coming.